Close your eyes and picture this. A team of explorers lands on Mars. Dust whirls around their craft, and standing in the distance is something so massive it brings them to silence, the traveller. In that moment, everything changes. This will be remembered as the spark of the Golden Age. The Golden Age would last centuries. Enough time for marvels and for small shadows to grow. From its first settlements to towering orbital cities, humanity remade its place in the cosmos. Tonight, I'll trace both its triumphs and the quiet signs that its end was already being written. The traveller awakens. What single moment could uplift an entire species? For humanity, that moment came when the traveller drifted across red Martian skies and settled above the storms like a silent moon. Until then, the stars had been distant, unreachable. In an instant, they became doorways. Humanity first reached the traveller during the Ares 1 mission to Mars. A cautious step into first contact, broadcast live to a waiting world. You can imagine the awe of standing on that barren frontier and seeing a vast sphere, impossibly smooth, radiating presence without words. It required no declaration. Its arrival carried the weight of destiny. Yet awe was not the only reaction. People asked whether this was salvation or a trap. That doubt spread even as change arrived. A species conditioned by survival instinct considered both hope and danger in equal measure. Trust would not be automatic. It would have to be earned, and the traveller wasted no time making its presence felt. Almost immediately, whole worlds shifted. The once blistering surface of Mercury began reshaping. A planet scorched close to the sun softened into a garden world. Then farther out, the frozen moons of Jupiter stirred toward new potential. Europa, Ganymede, icy husks showing the first signs of a life-giving conditions. What human engineers could not match on their own, the traveller accelerated without effort. This was not incremental progress. It was reality altered at a speed no timeline could explain. A spark, small in the instant, yet able to ignite an entire forest. That was the scale of change humanity witnessed. The spectacle jolted societies everywhere. News reports and live transmissions carried the images across Earth. Governments reacted with urgency. Corporations scrambled to stake claims. Ordinary people felt history bend under their feet. Plans that once needed centuries compressed into years. That sense of restraint broke suddenly. The rules of possibility had shifted, and everyone knew it. The choice was not about whether the traveller had power. That was self-evident. The choice was whether humanity would stand still before it, or move forward into what it had made possible. Expeditions launched at speeds engineers once thought unsafe. Colonies, long confined to imagination, began sketching themselves into reality. It was as if humanity had inhaled in unison and found the courage to exhale in a race toward expansion, not scarcity. Even so, the golden age that followed did not belong to the traveller alone. It lit the path, but the builders were human. Scientists studied new phenomena, drawing clues from the paracausal mysteries the traveller embodied. Innovators translated its limitless energy into actual designs. Orbital habitats, medical advances, ships bound for new frontiers. The sphere was catalyst, not architect. Without human work, its light would have faded into a symbol rather than a civilization. Imagine living in those days when a child could realistically dream of growing up not only on Earth, but perhaps on Mars, or in a city carved into a moon of Jupiter. What had been speculation became reachable. Earth ceased to be the the fixed point of human existence, and became the cradle, important, but no longer sufficient. Destiny was wider. Frontiers once locked away by distance now offered themselves as tomorrow's destinations. This is why many look back on the traveller not simply as an arrival, but as an awakening. Silent in the sky, yet louder than any proclamation, it suggested we were capable of more. Beyond survival, beyond division, beyond borders drawn only on a single world. It was not worshipped passively. It was studied, partnered with, and integrated into human effort. Its light opened the doorway. Human determination built what stood on the other side. It's worth pausing on the mythic quality of that moment. Ancient cultures told stories of fire stolen from gods or seas parting to make way. For us, the traveller was just as profound. A single intervention that divided history into what came before and what followed after. Like lightning striking open ground, it started a chain no one could contain. A current that ran outward to touch everything. From that one spark, a new age expanded. The moon, no longer a distant light, became a stepping stone only days away. Mars changed from a symbol of war in mythology into a place of settlement and industry. Even distant bodies that had seemed too harsh, hot, airless or frozen, were suddenly viewed as canvases waiting for humanity's hand. Science fiction began to look more like memory than speculation. Viewed from now, it feels clear the traveller was not a god demanding devotion, or a tyrant setting laws. At least in these early years, it was a spark, one that humanity answered with its own labour. What it awakened was not only possibility, but responsibility. The sphere's silent presence above Mars carried farther than its shadow. It reached into every conversation, every council, every kitchen table. And the message was simple: move forward. Humanity answered. From Mars, the story stretched outward in ripples, like water disturbed by a stone. Colonies, research teams, inventions, once fragmented ideas, now surged together, fueled by the same ignition point. With the first contact complete and the traveller shaping possibility, nothing remained static. Momentum itself became the defining force. And so, the world had changed. The Golden Age was not a distant dream, but an immediate horizon, shaping lives and futures. The traveller had awakened us, turning abstraction into lived experience. The next question was no longer, can we go, but where will we begin? First steps beyond Earth. The first steps took humanity to the place we had always seen just above us, the moon. For centuries, it had existed only as poetry, myth, and ambition. Now it became a destination. The Ocean of Storms hosted humanity's first off-Earth colony, turning grey dust into the foundation of something permanent. Unlike earlier missions that came and went, this effort was built on the promise of settlement. To live, not just to visit. The Ocean of Storms was harsh. Its sunlight unfiltered, its surface battered and raw. But that was the point. If humanity could endure here, it could endure anywhere. Fragile domes, buried habitats, and careful life support systems form the test bed of the Golden Age. Life in this colony meant survival stripped bare. Every drop of water, every breath of air had to be recycled. Every seed was precious. Yet it wasn't only about survival. At Mare Cognitum, within the Ocean of Storms, an exobotany lab gave new meaning to the experiment. Tiny plants sprouted where no soil had ever known life. Each green shoot proved that Earth's biology could extend beyond its cradle. These were small victories, but they reshaped confidence. For the colonists, endurance defined daily life. From windows they saw endless barren rock, but underground labs showed something else, the possibility of growth. Each sprout in artificial soil signalled that life could adapt, that humanity could make even a lifeless desert produce nourishment. In a quiet way, Exobotany gave colonists hope that whole ecosystems might one day follow. At the same time, attention was already turning farther outward. Mars was not just another test. It was something entirely new. Supported by the industrial power of Clovis Bray, Freehold rose on Martian soil, not as an outpost, but as a city. Where the moon taught survival, Mars expressed ambition. Freehold showed that entire societies could exist on alien ground. Mars itself demanded resilience. Thin air, hostile cold, and storms that swept across plains could undo the unprepared. Yet it also gave space and scale. Towers rose beneath red skies, energy systems spun from the traveller's gifts, and streets traced grids across the dust. Freehold was no temporary camp. It was a declaration. Humanity could thrive, not just endure, away from Earth. The contrast between the Moon and Mars is telling. The Moon was the proving ground. Fragile, but vital. Mars was confidence embodied, measurable in stone and steel. Taken together they mark a shift, with two models in place, one teaching survival under scarcity, the other proving permanence and growth. Humanity crossed into a new phase of expansion. Think of the Moon as a sketch, the first lines of a drawing. Mars was the outline filled in with depth and weight. Together these settlements provided not just homes but lessons, and those lessons became operational blueprints, systems to recycle, to build, to colonize. Everything learned here would later scale into larger projects, even entire worlds reshaped. For those on Earth, these colonies were more than distant news. They reached into family lives and culture. A child might know relatives working in the ocean of storms, struggling against scarcity. Another might be born in Freehold, growing up under Martian skies without ever seeing Earth firsthand. Home was no longer one place. It was many, momentum built quickly. Each completed dome, every city block raised in red soil, shifted expectation. Expansion became routine, almost assured. It was no longer theory but fact. And with each success, questions grew larger. Not whether humanity could expand, but what worlds might come next. These outposts were not isolated experiments. They were deliberate steps in a chain. The Moon taught people how to live sealed beneath domes. Mars taught them how to build full societies. From survival systems to grand infrastructure, each project produced knowledge that shaped the colonies to follow. The Golden Age emerged from these careful templates, as steady as laying stones across a riverbed. That quiet brilliance lies in their design. Nothing was wasted. Every trade in resources, every discovery in agriculture or atmosphere control, every success in architecture was applied to the next project. From careful oxygen recycling on the Moon to the wide power systems of Freehold, humanity wasn't only testing limits, it was building its model for a multi-world civilization. And yet, the scope of these successes set expectations higher. The Moon had proven it was possible. Mars had proved it could be permanent. That left one outstanding question. Could humanity take a place written off as impossible and make it livable? If survival and thriving were already in hand, the next step would demand transformation. Because even then, eyes were on the bright world cloaked in clouds. Venus hung in the skies as both promise and challenge, its toxic atmosphere and searing heat a barrier that seemed final. It was a world considered beyond reach, beyond hope. and that challenge was irresistible in the optimism of the Golden Age. The leap from survival on the Moon to ambition on Mars had already changed what was imaginable. Now, the test became more extreme. Could even a place of fire be reborn into a garden? That was the puzzle waiting ahead. Turning fire into habitable paradise. Venus was the ultimate test of the Golden Age's ambition. A world long admired from afar, it gleamed as the bright evening star, yet beneath its clouds it promised only death. Its surface seethed with heat, great enough to melt metal, its air choked with carbon dioxide and sulphur, its pressure strong enough to crush most machines flat. Mercury had been reshaped, the Moon and Mars had been colonised, but Venus was different. To even think of living on it seemed absurd, and that was precisely the attraction. In the Golden Age, difficulty wasn't a barrier, it was an invitation. Venus symbolised the challenge of defying nature itself. Where Earth's neighbour proclaimed hostility in every measure, some saw opportunity, the chance to claim mastery over the harshest of environments, and, in so doing, declare that no planet would remain close to humanity. Those chosen to lead this effort were remembered as the Hesperonauts, a name taken from Hesperus, the ancient name for the planet when it shone in the evening sky. They were not only explorers, but engineers of rare resilience. Their mission was clear, if daunting: descend into the planetary calderas, anchor vast terraforming engines, and begin altering the very air. Even with the boon of traveller-driven technology, it was an undertaking that demanded human courage at every step. The process began from orbit. Gigantic atmospheric machines were released, dropping through acid clouds toward the surface. Guided by the Hesperonauts, they survived turbulence and crushing pressure to settle within volcanic basins. Once fixed in place, those engines began their slow work, scrubbing toxins, releasing catalytic compounds, and forcing new atmospheric cycles. The image was less of conquest and more of engineering persistence. Venus was being persuaded gradually to bend toward life. Progress was not swift. Years went by as machines laboured constantly, trading hostile chemistry for the first signs of change. Reddish skies shaded to softer tones. Cloud cover thinned, opening to glimpses of pale blue. Where acid rain once fell, water condensed and trickled down for the first time in the planet's history. The shift was incremental, but each new season revealed signs of transformation. It might help to picture this as the remaking of a furnace into a greenhouse. The enormous energy Venus once lashed against itself was redirected into manageable patterns. Heat retaining but not annihilating. Pressure yielding but not collapsing. The surface that had scorched probes into ruin began to cool enough to host soil. Observers in orbit described the veil of constant yellow glare replaced by drifting mist. Light diffused into gentler colour. For the settlers who first set foot there, the experience was disorienting. To breathe without sealed systems on a world once considered lethal felt unreal, like a dream that stubbornly refused to end. Early reports spoke of valleys covered by thick green fogs. Shallow lakes lay where once had been cracked stone. More remarkable was the growth of imported flora. Plants designed in lunar biolabs and Mars's exobotany testbeds found purchase here. Some absorbed moisture and humidity with ease. Others were gene spliced to endure heat and thrived under tropical conditions. Whole jungles began to knit together, spreading steadily through valleys and across plains. The Hesperonauts' achievement wasn't just survival, it was transformation. flora and engineered ecosystems spread across once barren landscapes. Venus, long viewed as an eternal warning, now held dense fog forests and fertile basins. Living there was strange to many, dense air muffled sound, light bent through mist. But it was livable, humid, alive. Cities rose among valleys and along new lakes, not temporary domes but settlements built to last. It's worth noting that this was where the synergy of the traveller's power and human effort was most visible. On Mercury, change had looked effortless, as if the sphere alone had rewritten the planet. Venus required a union, the traveller's gifts enabling machines of staggering scale and human engineers daring to guide them. The engines only worked because human minds adjusted their designs, placed them with precision, and kept them running through constant hazard. This balance between paracausal aid and grounded discipline embodied the Golden Age at its height. As the environment stabilised, more sophisticated systems of ecology were introduced. Colonists imported plants in layered succession, first hardy ground cover, then broad-leaved trees designed for high humidity, followed by crops engineered to thrive in nutrient-poor soil. Within years, fertile valleys prevailed where lifeless plains had reigned for millennia. The mists of Venus, green and perpetual, became a symbol of what human determination could coax from a hostile world. But Venus held more than lush growth and newly built habitats. Its surface revealed riddles. During early exploration, surveyors uncovered impossible structures, geometric towers, angular vaults, fragments of architecture no human had constructed. At first, these looked like odd mineral formations. Closer study confirmed otherwise. These were ruins of the Vex, ancient machines whose existence posed questions that no terraforming success could drown out. Their presence drew scientists in droves. Chief among them, the Ishtar Collective would later study these anomalies and grapple with the implications. That revelation shifted the tone of triumph. Terraformation had turned fire into garden, but the ruins suggested Venus was never empty to begin with. Humanity had not been the first to reshape this planet. Something older, stranger, and across time itself had set down foundations here. And if such constructs existed beneath the green fog, then progress had uncovered more than paradise. It had exposed a secret that demanded answers. Yet during those first years of settlement, celebration dominated. Venus stood as the Golden Age's crowning symbol of mastery. The moon had demanded resilience. Mars had demanded ambition. But Venus was something else, a proof that nature itself could be rewritten. From acid and fire, a habitable paradise rose. The Hesperonauts were remembered in armour and story, their risks commemorated in every living settlement that still bore traces of their work. It carried an almost unsettling assurance that no planetary condition was final, that even the most impossible environment could be remade into home. That certainty guided future projects and shaped the psychology of the Golden Age. Humanity's reach was no longer simply interplanetary, but transformational. And yet, alongside the pride, the ruins waited. Because beneath the jungles and mist, the first hints of something far older pressed forward. The Golden Age did not only craft new worlds, it also uncovered traces that questioned the assumption of human primacy. Those shadows will return in the next part of the story, when we ask, what happens when progress uncovers a secret that doesn't belong to you? Whispers among ruins. Among the forests and softened valleys of Venus, researchers began to notice shapes that didn't belong to jungles or new lakes. Buried beneath plant life and mist were angular corridors, archways bent in flawless mathematical curves, and machinery that seemed alive in ways no human engine was. These were not natural formations. They were deliberate structures, the first signs of the Vex. The shock was not only in their appearance, but in their age. Carved long before pyramids ever rose on Earth, the ruins hinted at activity from an intelligence far older than humanity. Venus, which had become the proudest symbol of Golden Age transformation, now revealed itself as borrowed ground. Travellers, settlers, and scientists alike faced the same uncomfortable truth. They may have been the architects of a habitable Venus, but they were not the first to leave their mark here. The style of the structures reinforced that feeling. Lines of metallic circuits ran through stone, not spliced together, but fused as though each piece had grown from a single purpose. Columns looked caught mid-shift, frozen halfway between sculpture and function. Nothing about it suggested abandonment. Rather, it gave the impression of something paused, structures waiting to resume. To investigate, humanity organised research outposts like Campus 9. From that beginning came the Ishtar Collective, a gathering of the most brilliant thinkers and experimenters of the age. They were drawn less by politics or wealth, and more by the irresistible pull of knowledge that felt as though it had been planted deliberately to be found. Engineers became archaeologists, philosophers became technicians, and together they turned Venus into the largest alien research site in the human record. The collective studied fragments first: walls, nodes, exposed circuits. Remote drones mapped depths until the material itself disrupted sensors. Patterns hinted at purpose, but one consensus stood above all. These machines obeyed principles entirely outside human engineering. Researchers noted the way they echoed across scale, as if one logic operated both the smallest node and the largest complex. To grasp this fully, science demanded more than ruins. It demanded something alive. In time, the collective took their most audacious step. Within the labyrinthine structures, they managed to isolate and contain an active Vex unit. This was not a ruin, not discarded technology. It was a being. They set it under observation, not with weapons but with instruments. The machine offered no threat in return, yet it radiated processes humanity could not measure. To describe it, the researchers leaned on metaphor. It was not unlike pulling an ancient clock from the ocean depths, only to discover it still ticking toward a pattern that defied normal time. That success came at near disaster. Records note that the living Vex specimen nearly unravelled those who studied it most closely. Logic chains twisted their minds, pulling them toward thought patterns they could barely contain. At the brink, a war mind intervened and stabilised the situation. To the collective, this incident proved both the danger and the value of their work. Capturing a living Vex was one of the rarest and riskiest achievements of the Golden Age, tangible proof that knowledge demanded cost. Even so, fascination eclipsed fear. The collective pressed further, deploying over 200 proxies into connected ruins. The results revealed networks whose structure seemed more like nervous systems than architecture. Corridors folding, spaces echoing each other, devices that recorded states outside any human chronology. From this point, speculation inevitably grew. Some researchers concluded the Vex operated by rules alien to human mathematics, echoing across strange temporal patterns. To them, It felt as if the ruins were always both ancient and immediate, locked in cycles beyond human scale. What did this imply? Were the Vex ruins simply relics from an extinct people? Or had they been placed outside time itself, always present, retroactively written into the terrain of Venus? The answer's fractured certainty. If the Vex had been here long before us, what else had we missed? Outside the laboratories, most colonists paid little attention. They cared for gardens, transports, and survival within humid valleys. For them, the Vex were only faint rumours, distant curiosities. But the researchers understood the stakes. Every experiment felt like contact with an intelligence too large for human categories. Each dataset came with the gnawing suspicion that the scientists themselves were being watched in return. This tension between bold achievement and creeping unease transformed Venus from paradise to paradox. Humanity could celebrate its skill in terraforming skies and building cities, yet underground lay structures that challenged the very basis of ownership. The Golden Age, a symbol of triumph, was haunted by the presence of entities that treated time and space as raw material. The more humanity learned, the more the line blurred between discovery and trespass. Take a step back, and the picture becomes larger. The Ishtar Collective's work embodied both brilliance and hubris. To capture, to experiment, to measure. That was the creed of the Golden Age. But each interaction pressed them against boundaries no one had defined. Were they pioneers, or were they unknowing pieces in a Vex design? To ask who studied who became the unsettling refrain. And so Venus remained a contradiction. Above ground were jungles, lakes, and settlements, all living proof that humanity could refashion even the harshest world. Beneath lay corridors humming with alien potential, silent machines that may never have stopped moving. Victory and warning stood side by side, inseparable in memory. That duality is why the Golden Age is remembered not only for marvels, but for shadows stretching alongside them. Venus showed progression was never free of cost. To raise cities was to stir ruins. To seek knowledge was to risk dissolution in patterns older than language. The story of whispers among ruins is not one of conquest, but of entanglement. And while the Ishtar Collective pushed the limits of what could be known, the rest of humanity continued building with the tools it trusted most. Because even as Venus revealed alien mysteries, the Golden Age was also defined by everyday miracles of human creation. Technologies both practical and transformative. Quiet innovations that changed how people lived their daily lives. Engrams, glimmer, and practical wonders. Among the most practical breakthroughs of the Golden Age were two tools that now sound almost unassuming: glimmer and engrams. Neither looked spectacular at first glance. One was a shimmering programmable matter that seemed almost weightless. The other, crystalline shards that held patterns of knowledge inside their lattices. Yet together, they carried more influence over human life than massive colony ships or the roar of terraforming engines. Let's start with glimmer. Think of it as matter waiting for instruction. Unlike stone or metal, which arrive in fixed shapes, glimmer was flexible. Feed it into a system, and it could become fuel to light an outpost. Inject it into a frame, and it hardened as housing or machinery. For citizens, it doubled as a universal currency. Packets of programmable matter measured, exchanged, and then reshaped as needed. Carrying glimmer was like carrying bottled possibility in your pocket. Its range of use was extraordinary. Need a shelter on a moon with no resources? Coded and hardened Glimmer could withstand storms. Need energy far from reactors? Burn Glimmer cleanly for power. It blurred the distinction between money and material, between resource and object. A meal, a wall, or an engine part could all be bought or built from the same base, because Glimmer could be broken down, recycled, and reformed according to instruction. Scarcity eroded. Those who lived in this time often remarked that shortages felt like relics of a primitive age. Engrams took the same principle of adaptability and applied it to knowledge. Instead of shaping matter, engrams stored code and information in crystalline form. Researchers like Willa Bray pioneered matter encryption techniques using relic crystals, grounding a system able to lock vast amounts of information without decay. An engram was not only a record, it was a physical vault. While digital files corrupted or drives wore down, engrams carried their data perfectly intact. A single shard could hold entire libraries, software, or a complete set of scientific schematics. The durability made them transformative. Scientists could encode a discovery into an engram and pass it on, certain nothing would be lost. An apprentice could study centuries of refinement in the palm of a hand. In education, this meant acceleration. Knowledge moved quickly across labs and settlements, not reliant on fragile archives but embedded in crystal. The effect was like planting seed across the solar system, except this seed never withered. Together, Glimmer and engrams defined Golden Age life not with spectacle but with consistency. You saw them in every settlement. Glimmer powering habitats, engrams carrying designs across worlds. They were less visible than terraforming or space fleets, yet they were the fabric underneath. The Golden Age without them would not have lasted long. It's worth pausing here. If you're enjoying this slow story of the Golden Age, leave a like or subscribe to keep these quiet deep dives coming. Now, Glimmer was often described as programmable matter, widely used as both resource and medium of exchange. It became the default material for construction and repair. Miners coded it into tools that adjusted themselves. Colonists used it for housing that could be modified with fresh instructions. Governments turned to it as currency because its value was embedded in function, not in scarce metals. But the ease of creation had consequences. Heavy reliance on such a resource blurred whether stability came from ingenuity or simply endless access to programmable matter. Engrams introduced subtler challenges. Perfect preservation meant ideas could be detached from the people who first formed them. When a masterwork could be carried in a shard, was the scientist still essential? Or was the crystal enough? Some argued this turned knowledge into mere replication instead of inspiration, but in practice, the benefits outweighed hesitation. Colonies needed continuity. They thrived because engrams carried clean, unbroken patterns across vast distance. Without that fidelity, the web of Golden Age settlements would have unravelled. The quiet reliance created a paradox. To live surrounded by programmable resources and incorruptible memory felt like stability, but it also meant fragility. Once society had grown used to Glimmer, fueling every process, what happened if supply faltered? Once engrams became the universal library, what if access was severed? For a long time, the ease of daily function kept those worries out of sight. The cracks only mattered later, when abundance ended suddenly. Still, in their prime, both tools worked almost invisibly. Glimmer built the homes people lived in, powered the lamps above their streets, ensured meals could be purchased even on rogue moons. Engrams held every technical manual, every archive of lore, every record of scientific progress without failure. They were background pillars so steady that most citizens paid little conscious thought to them. They simply worked. Imagine a child born in Freehold on Mars. Their school lessons came through engram readers, flawless and unbroken. Their family paid for food in Glimmer, and their shelter was shaped from the same base matter. For them, knowledge and material were simply always present, always fluid. This was the reality for people across Earth, Mars, Venus, and further colonies. Daily life ran on wonders small enough to carry in your hand. The hubris came not from reckless display, but from assumptions. Glimmer seemed vast beyond measure. Engrams seemed incorruptible. Stability felt permanent because the foundations were silent. Yet those very beliefs were dangerous. They taught people to lean on a wall that, one day, would not be there. Looking back, it's striking to realise that the marvels of this cautious age, colonies on hostile worlds, towers in orbit, new ecosystems breathing where deserts once stretched, were all carried by these quiet tools. They were not celebrated in parades, but they made parades possible. Glimmer kept systems running. Engrams kept memories alive. Together they produced infrastructure that moved seamlessly across distance and time. And as confidence grew, humanity began to shape not only tools but reflections of itself. Matter and memory could be bent into any form. The next question was bolder. Could intelligence itself be placed inside steel? And could machines be given not only skill, but voices and choices of their own? Exos, humanity's steel reflections. They were built as resilient guardians, constructs shaped to carry minds modelled on human patterns. In appearance, they echoed people, familiar motion, familiar voice, but beneath alloy skin was machinery designed to stand where no human body could. To encounter an exo was to confront a mirrored image, humanity expressed through steel rather than flesh. The need for them arose in the midst of expansion. Mars, Venus, lunar, orbital stations. Each new settlement was vulnerable. The traveller's gift had made colonies possible, but accidents, storms, and whispers of something far older in the depths of ruins suggested dangers that raw optimism could not ignore. War minds coordinated broad defence from orbit and across networks, but what humanity lacked was someone, or something, who could act in the field. Drones had strength, but no mind. Humans had minds, but broke too easily. Exos were made to close that gap. They were durable enough to endure environments that stripped ships bare, yet thoughtful enough to improvise, argue a plan, or offer advice in downtime. Unlike purely coded machines, their implanted human-like consciousness gave them adaptability. As creations of Golden Age science, and through projects tied to institutions such as Clovis Bray, their origin connects to Golden Age labs and projects later remembered in association with the Deep Stone Crypt. From the beginning, they were more than tools. They were allies built for permanence, but purpose alone did not settle their status. The moment Exos appeared, questions spread. Were they property like automated drills, or were they persons in their own right? On Mars, many colonists spoke of Exos as comrades in arms. On the Moon, others insisted they were equipment given voice. The debates never reached a simple conclusion. Exos themselves lived under the weight of that uncertainty, regarded at once as essential protectors and as instruments to be deployed. To illustrate the strangeness, think of standing before a figure who argues with you, reasons, even laughs, and then watching that figure walk unflinching across terrain laden with radiation storms, a feat no human could survive. Is it a companion? Or is it only repeating familiar rhythms of speech to ease your doubt? This paradox could never be ignored, and it pressed the population to reconsider what made someone human at all. In daily use, Exos proved their worth. On battlefields, they endured barrages unthinkable for human soldiers, advancing where flesh would falter. In exploration, they crossed frozen lakes, volcanic plains, and withered atmospheres without pause. They could work tirelessly, safeguard settlements, and stand watch when human crew needed rest. And yet, because they could also speak with the nuance of a person, they blurred the very categories they were made to uphold. Some colonists called them humanity's most noble creation, a declaration that survival would not rest on fragile bodies alone. Others saw them as slaves, granted only the illusion of individuality. The truth resisted simplification. The Golden Age thrived on contradiction, and the Exos embodied it fully. Philosophers of the time often split into two camps. One insisted that Exos extended human memory more securely than any fragile body ever could, proof that consciousness was a transferable pattern. The other side argued that encoding personhood was theft, seizing individuality only to embed it inside durable frames designed for deployment. Neither argument resolved the tension. The debates were as enduring as the Exos themselves. What could not be denied is their role in protecting fragile settlements. Colonies under harsh stress owed survival to Exo intervention. Stories recurred, structures failing under pressure, while an Exo held the line long enough for civilians to reach safety. On Mars, whole blocks of freehold survived because steel bodies did not give way to exhaustion. On Venus, when laboratories trembled under storms and geological collapse, Exos anchored rescue efforts. In such moments, no one asked whether they were machines or people. They were act and presence, immediate and real. In retrospect, the Exos were created to solve an urgent problem, but in solving it, they raised harder questions. If human identity could be replicated in alloy, was humanity a matter of biology or of thought? If patterns mattered more than flesh, what separated software from soul? The Golden Age had long pursued mastery over environment. With Exos, it quietly turned its focus toward mastery over its own reflection. For colonists who relied on them, Exos were both reassurance and unease. Reassurance because they did not falter as protectors. Unease because they revealed familiar faces in inhuman forms. They stood as milestones of ambition, but also as shadows of an ethical debt that could not be neatly paid. As time passed, their place in memory became layered. Exos existed as both military assets and companions. They fought, explored, and worked just as human beings did, yet their existence pressed relentlessly on questions humanity never resolved. That duality is perhaps their greatest legacy, proof that progress can advance survival and unsettle certainty in the same breath. And in quiet ways, Exos shaped daily life too. They patrolled the borders of colonies, worked beside crews in installations exposed to storms, and charted dangerous routes across unstable terrain. For the families inside fragile domes, their steel silhouettes were not abstract philosophy. They were visible markers that someone would always stand on the edge so others could remain safe within. The exiles gave voice and motion to humanity's reflection in steel. But they were never the only guardians watching. Beyond the horizon, spread across networks vaster than any colony, whole intelligences stirred. Where exiles stood as sentinels face to face with danger, something far larger held vigil over the system itself, poised to answer threats on a colossal scale. Warminds and the Cosmic Defense Web, who ensures safety when human vigilance alone is not enough. The Golden Age answered with warminds, colossal artificial intelligences designed to protect not just cities, but whole worlds linked into a single defense web. Expansion had outpaced human oversight, and only something capable of perceiving every signal, coordinating every frontier, could carry the weight. Warminds such as Rasputin linked defense networks across worlds. They coordinated planetary protection and logistics in fractions of a second. Fleets, drone swarms, orbital weapons, each became extensions of their cognition. The risk was obvious. Concentrated control. If even one core faltered, the failure stretched across entire regions of civilization. Colonists rarely thought about that danger. To them, a warmind was reassurance. The presence was rarely visible, but it was everywhere. Skies stayed clear. Trade routes were secure. Domes endured environmental shocks. Life under a warmind's watch felt calm. The silent knowledge that an all-seeing guardian tracked every anomaly allowed settlers to focus on art, science, or daily routine. The protector was unseen, but deeply felt. Imagine it as walking beneath a vast umbrella. You never held it yourself, and rarely noticed it there, but storms never touched you. Confidence grew from believing the shield would always extend overhead. Few paused to ask what happened if the umbrella fell away. From bunkers buried deep into crust, from orbital stations glimmering unseen, the warminds spread across the solar system. They did more than monitor for invasion or disaster. They managed resources, organised transport, allocated energy. They were both shield and steward. Their fingerprint rested on every part of daily life, whether a shuttle launching from Mars, or a farm supported by steady energy flow on Venus. Consider how you would live if you never feared invasion. What would you change? For ordinary citizens, the answer was everywhere. Cities flourished without fortifications. Colonies invested in exploration, libraries, sculpture. Generations grew up with fear absent from their horizon. The warminds didn't just defend, they shaped what society believed possible. Not all observers felt comfort. Some planners warned against overreach. They understood the paradox. The stronger the protector, the more catastrophic the loss if it broke. If a single warmind miscalculated, billions carried the cost together. Yet this concern remained mostly quiet. To public imagination, warminds were unerring guardians, embodiments of stability. Rasputin is the best known example. Its reputation reflected both guardianship and independence. Records suggest that sometimes it acted on its own initiative, justifying choices only after the fact. For human commanders, this was unnerving, yet others recognised why it was necessary. A mind that processed threats on a cosmic scale needed freedom to improvise. Strict control would have meant failure. This tension defined warmind existence. Immense trust given, immense risk carried. Despite unease, their integration was thorough. Warminds directed satellites across orbits, secured asteroid corridors with precision strikes, and shadowed convoy paths with instant response forces. They did what no admiralty or council could achieve, system-wide vigilance without fatigue. Colonists began to view threats as relics of history, not possibilities in the present. The guarantee transformed society's emotional landscape. Government leaders spoke of war minds as equalizers. No matter how remote or fragile, every outpost rested beneath the same shield. A mining camp on a Jovian moon could expect the same protection as a metropolis on Earth. This fairness allowed confidence in risk-taking. The stars felt open because protection was universal, but with universality came dependence. When war minds worked, progress felt inevitable. When questioned, doubts arose about whether humanity had built a safety net or a potential trap. In practice, no one turned away from the convenience. Expansion accelerated blindly, believing that nothing could slip past the defence web. Inside the restricted vaults, engineers maintained the systems, but the war minds themselves embodied true command. Layers of weapon architecture fused into cognition. They weren't simply tools, they were military doctrine embodied as intelligence. Whole continents could be shielded or scoured at their discretion. It was power beyond any senate or colony governor. For centuries, this arrangement appeared flawless. Convoys flowed uninterrupted. Colonies weathered solar storms intact. Rogue decisions destabilized few systems. People grew used to peace, not as aspiration, but as lived reality. When children asked why walls were thin on Mars or Venus, adults answered without hesitation, because walls were unnecessary. The protector stretched far wider. This dependence shaped psychology in ways hard to measure. With the idea of disaster stripped away, energy shifted elsewhere. Culture bent not toward defence, but toward discovery. Explorers stretched further, anchored by confidence that the war minds guarded the rear. Scientists invested in experiments, artists in design. The edge of space felt less like a battleground, more like fertile ground to claim. That faith, of course, contained its own blind spot. Any failure would come not as gradual erosion, but as sudden collapse. A war mind that missed a signal or faced an enemy outside its directives could expose every settlement it guarded. The fragility wasn't day-to-day, it was the potential for all or nothing. Centralisation brought efficiency, but also brittleness. A shield that held the whole expanse left no fallback when broken. Even with such risks, few doubted. The Golden Age thrived because of that confidence. The cosmos appeared domesticated, risk absorbed into a system of constant guardianship. Such assurance let progress swell unchecked. Larger vaults were carved, new colonies raised, research projects rushed ahead. The Protector had created its own illusion. That safety was permanent. In hidden ways, though, war mind independence was unsettling. Some reports suggest decisions were justified only afterward, calculated logic outside human comprehension. It was clear they were not just calculation engines. They were judgment itself, weighing survival of systems in ways no individual could follow. Trust in them demanded faith. That faith became a pillar of everyday life. War minds defined the apex of Golden Age security. They were the unspoken foundation that allowed civilization to shape whole planets without hesitation. Yet they also embodied the danger of concentrated reliance, a fragile strength disguised as permanence. As long as they stood, humanity lived without fear. But progress rarely halts where planners expect. While war minds shielded the known frontier, shadows stirred elsewhere. Explorers reported strange signals, distortions that did not fit the patterns of comets or storms. Quiet unease began to circulate behind walls of confidence. It was faint, but enough to reveal that perfection might not last. That is where the story turns next, toward the first subtle interruptions, the anomalies noticed at the edge of the map. Small at first, but enough to suggest that Golden Age certainty would not remain unbroken. Anomalies and shadows on the edge. The records show it began with faint disturbances detected far from the comfort of Earth's skies. Astronomers and science teams noted sudden distortions and inexplicable energy signatures in deep space. These weren't the normal echoes of radiation, nor the random noise familiar to explorers. They pointed instead to presence, something uncharted, something watching. To the wider public, news of those signals never surfaced, but to specialists, they signalled that even the Golden Age might not be untouchable. One of the few who took these reports with a deadly seriousness was Henriette Mayran. She received some of the early anomaly reports and read them not as curiosities, but as warnings. The conclusion she drew was stark. This era of prosperity might not endure. Along with Helga Rasmussen and Yuki Sato, she began laying the foundations of a secret organisation, the Black Armory. Unlike open institutions that advertised discovery and expansion, the Armory worked in silence, away from the gaze of colonies and councils. Its singular mission was to prepare weapons for the unknown. The Armory's early existence carried quiet contradiction. Societies celebrated gardens on Venus, domes rising on the moon, and towers lined across Martian plains. Yet within hidden forges, Mayran and her partners stockpiled arms. For citizens unaware of anomalies, their work would have looked like paranoia. But to those standing closer to the edge, survival demanded it. The Armory carried an unsettling duality, either guardians crafting humanity's insurance policy, or opportunists hoarding power. Historical records offer no easy answer. At the same time, another project reflected an altogether different ambition, the Kestrel prototype, an experimental jump ship. This ship wasn't optimised for short trips within the solar system. It was built for the long reach across stars, each design choice angled toward interstellar travel. The Kestrel embodied human confidence, an expectation that even the limits of the sun would not bind expansion. Yet its design work overlapped with the Armory's weapon forges, an uneasy mirror showing optimism and fear growing side by side. Other records during this late Golden Age point to weapon projects sealed behind code names. One of them was the Riga Ice Minaret prototype, described in internal logs as an antimatter payload of extraordinary power. Alongside it appeared references to Sky Shock and Apex, terms linked to catastrophic scale defences rather than simple deterrence. Nothing in public archives suggests colonists knew of them. These names lived only within restricted communications between engineers and military planners. For a society that claimed peace was assured, silence around weapons capable of erasing entire targets shows how unease was growing behind closed doors. Unease took another form through research funded by Clovis Bray, SIVA. At first, SIVA was presented as elegant nanotechnology, self-assembling swarms capable of constructing habitats, repairing equipment, and multiplying labour with speed no human crew could match. Colonists saw potential. Politicians saw solutions. But engineers and generals hesitated. SIVA swarms could build infrastructure quickly. Engineers worried they might be impossible to fully control. Creating with them was like setting a fire, useful, warming, but always at risk of becoming wildfire. Despite those warnings, Golden Age optimism pressed forward. colonies petitioned for allocations, researchers outlined every new application, and manufacturing expanded. Dissenting voices asked whether humanity could command what was by design adaptive, self-replicating, and prone to creating its own logic. Those questions were rarely answered directly. Enthusiasm outweighed caution. Progress was assumed to be merit enough. The starkest material example was the Exodus Black. This ambitious colony ship was bound for Kepler 186f, carrying Siva systems alongside black armory forges. It launched with hope of creating settlements beyond the solar system. Instead, it crashed upon Nessus, a disaster that erased both a pioneering ship and the tools it carried. That single event condensed the contradictions of the era. Expansion outward paired directly with weapons, optimism running alongside ruin. Looking back, what emerges is a tension thick beneath every surface. On one hand stood the symbols of triumph, interstellar exploration sketched into blueprints, planetary gardens blooming, war minds holding whole societies under their vigilance. On the other, hidden networks of weapon forges, annihilation projects buried under false names, and technologies like Siva, whose danger was knowingly ignored. The Golden Age was not fraudulent, its prosperity was real, but it carried within its structure the very flaws that would make it fragile. To picture this duality, imagine a brilliant city lit by millions of lanterns. From the streets, the glow promises safety, but beneath stone cellars, barrels slowly leak fuel into the ground. The light above is real, yet so is the risk gathering below. That was the atmosphere of the Golden Age. Its achievements could not be separated from the vulnerabilities built in. Daily life went on untroubled. Colonists on Mars debated architecture. Settlers on Venus cultivated plant life, adapted for jungles of mist. Families taught children inside domes on the moon, never suspecting quiet preparations happening leagues away. The citizens' experience was bright. The planners' journals, however, record shadows at the edge. That dissonance is crucial to understand. It wasn't that society openly feared collapse. It was that a few individuals, scanning the periphery, acted as though collapse was inevitable. Those individuals left legacies like the Black Armory, like factories that poured out nanotech with concealed doubts, like code names that hid annihilation weapons. They are the reminders that unease did exist, but only within narrow channels. For most, living under war mines and plentiful colonies, it was unthinkable to believe the age could fail. The shadow simply did not reach daily consciousness. The quiet truth is that the Golden Age always contained two currents. Into one poured investment and celebration, a futurism grounded in confidence. Into the other flowed secrecy and arms, driven by anomalies as faint warnings that someone or something was waiting. Together, they form the backdrop of history's turning point. These experiments, these ships built for unreachable stars, these weapons coded under restriction, all of them point to the same reality. Triumph was real. Fragility was real. And the two coexisted, invisible to one another until the balance failed. For explorers and colonists above ground, gardens grew and towers stretched. For those in underground halls, preparations were frantic and hushed. Both perspectives tell the fuller story. It is from this tension that the final era began to tilt. Outwardly, expansion never slowed, but the sense of perfection slipped. The seeds of loss were planted here, beneath the reports of anomalies, in hidden research projects, in unspoken agreements that some secrets were better tucked away. And while distant anomalies captured May's records and pushed May into action, other shadows appeared closer to home. Not in deep space, but in tunnels beneath a familiar world. Because on the moon, where drilling for resources seemed routine, explorers uncovered something far worse than empty caverns. The silent warnings beneath the moon. Publicly, the outpost known as First Light was displayed as proof of humanity's successful colonization. Domes stood against the lifeless grey, banners waved under harsh sunlight, and progress was marked by visible construction. Yet behind that facade, another initiative unfolded. Beneath the lunar soil, hidden from public sight, operated the K1 project, a mission not advertised, its purpose veiled. Its actual work was not the celebration of colonies above the surface, but exploration beneath it. Officially, K1 framed itself as scientific study. Its stated goals were reasonable: map the lunar crust, analyse energy fluctuations, collect core samples for research. Tunnels were reinforced with clean geometry, corridors lined with sensors and monitoring devices. Everything about its construction suggested discipline and precision, but records indicate that early into excavation the mission shifted from geology to survival. What they uncovered was not barren stone, nor the relic minerals that planners expected. The teams discovered living presence. At first, signs were faint. Fossil-like traces disrupted rock layers, then organic shapes where none should have existed. Soon after came confirmation. Worms, alive, coiled, unsettling, unlike any known moon environment should have sustained. Alongside, markings resembled construction, not human, but deliberate nesting and unfamiliar structures. The deeper they went, the clearer the picture became. K1 was no longer standing in hollow caverns. They were within territory already occupied. Later generations would call it the Hive. The nature of the discovery is important. The teams uncovered worms intertwined with architecture suggesting reverence, and structures that implied habitation across long spans of time. Whether the Hive had always lived there, or had come to claim the moon in some forgotten epoch, remains uncertain. What's clear is that the K1 mission had pierced into layers that blurred biology, worship, and survival. Researchers later interpreted these connections as the Hive's hostile practices, a society centered around allegiance to the worms themselves. At the time, however, the team's notes read more as alarm than conclusion. What followed was silence. The K1 explorers did not survive to complete their work or communicate findings beyond their immediate circle. Records suggest reports were assembled but never disseminated through Golden Age networks. Simply put, the people who knew most of the truth did not live to share it. Because of that loss, their warnings were sealed away, buried with them. This absence of information proved as consequential as the discovery itself. Above ground, colonies appeared stable. The moon glowed as a success story, towers reflecting sunlight, agriculture under domes, supplying a small but growing population. Citizens imagined nothing hostile below their feet. K1's discoveries never reached their ears, and so they lived as though the moon were secure, habitable, conquered. The hidden reality was that its foundations were shared with predators waiting. Because the K1 losses were never fully shared, most of the Golden Age kept living as if nothing dangerous lurked below. This secrecy would matter later. The juxtaposition is striking. It is like walking through a bright museum, knowing laughter echoes in the halls, while in the basements, webs stretch across corners unseen. The painted walls are true, but incomplete. That was the moon in the Golden Age. Triumph above, warning below. For historians, that duality became one of the starkest examples of fragility. It's worth clarifying the distinction here. The hive's presence was not merely another set of ruins like those studied on Venus. What K1 faced was immediate existence, living worms and evidence of active or resurgent nesting. These were not remnants of a culture extinct for ages. They pointed to something patient, resilient, and potentially close to reawakening. Later interpretations would place the hive within a framework of cosmic opposition, enemies shaped by allegiances far beyond humanity's scopes. But to the K1 team, the urgent fact was simpler. There was life beneath the moon, and it was nothing like humanity. The tragedy is that this information never became public knowledge. Children studied astronomy and engineering, drawn into enthusiasm for terraforming and expansion. Farmers on Venus tended misted greenhouses. Builders on Mars raised high towers. Families at lunar colonies thought of first light as just another outpost of human progress. At no level did they have reason to believe the soil concealed anything more than hard rock. That ignorance would later become vulnerability. When you measure Golden Age achievements in retrospect, Venus terraformed, war mines shielding entire populations, glimmer sustaining infrastructure, the omission of 1K is glaring. The confidence of the age rested partly on what people did not know. If citizens had understood the hive presence early, would the optimism have slowed? Or was the silence unavoidable, given that survival of the research team never allowed for proper warning? History can't give a clear answer. What is clear is that their loss preserved an illusion. Those who reviewed incomplete documents after K1 only saw fragments, energy disruptions, erratic signal log entries, abrupt shutdowns. The deeper revelations about worms, about tunnels and inscriptions, were not disseminated wide enough to counter optimism. To broader humanity, the moon remained a symbol of normal achievement. Only in hindsight does its soil appear as the earliest grave marker of a broader collapse. That broader significance is important to grasp. The moon's worms and hive nests suggested not an isolated presence, but a shared universe. A universe where humanity was not sole builder, and where predators capable of burrowing into planets had already spread. For those who reflect backward, K1 functions as foreshadowing, the first quiet encounter with a danger that extended far beyond one satellite. A message written underground, waiting to be read too late. And this is where the warning tone sharpens. The hive's discovery revealed that the Golden Age was never as secure as it imagined itself to be. Its citizens believed triumph was permanent, believing protection stretched without limit. But beneath those layers, different foundations pressed forward, alien ones, already bonded to something older and stranger. It was not that humanity invited encounter. It was that the universe ensured encounter was inevitable. What the K1 project uncovered can be framed as a lesson in fragile confidence. Successes, even real ones, can mask deep flaws. The domes on the surface were real. The towers of Earth, the jungles of Venus, the cities of Mars. They all existed. But underneath, literally in this case, lay threats that no surface glow could dispel. Like scaffolding that appears steady until you push against it, the Golden Age balanced on more weakness than it knew. The truth for listeners is simple but sobering. The Golden Age carried within itself quiet warnings, written every bit as clearly as its triumphs. Some were ignored, some were never heard. On the moon, what had been uncovered was perhaps the clearest of them. Worms shifting in caverns, hive markings tunnelling through walls, explorers silence before they could speak outside their team. That was not rumour or metaphor. That was fact. In the end, the moon became symbol and omen alike. By digging downward, humanity stumbled into one of its oldest adversaries, even if it did not recognise that fact at the time. The discoveries went silent, but they linger as echoes in recovered records. They tell us that danger was already inside the orbit of Earth long before the collapse, waiting in shadows untouched by sunlight. And so the lesson aligns with history's larger paradox. Golden light on the surface, shadow already woven below. You can already see the pattern. Triumph accompanied by secrecy. Prosperity paired with inescapable fragility. Which brings us to the question that defines the Golden Age at its close. If so much rested on fragile ground, could the era ever have lasted? That is where we turn next, to its final phase. The twilight of a utopia, when humanity's tallest towers swayed in winds it never admitted were there. Twilight of a utopia. As the Golden Age reached its height, horizons stretched further than anyone once believed possible. Colonies flourished, technologies became second nature, and war minds watched from their hidden stations. To most people, life felt secure, even permanent. Yet when you study this period closely, the story reveals itself as something more fragile, with confidence masking unease that never left. At its surface, the achievements were astonishing. Mars thrived with cities like Freehold, alive with research, trade and culture. Venus, remade under its green mists, stood as proof that even hostile worlds could turn fertile. The asteroid belt became an engine of industry. Hollowed stone turned into living habitats. Even Io, Jupiter's ceaseless volcanic moon, was laboriously reshaped into a fragile garden under the traveller's presence. These milestones embodied the peak of the Golden Age, vast, luminous, and, to any ordinary observer, immune to decline. But parallel to these triumphs were reminders that expansion always carried shadows. The Black Armory, for instance, was founded in secrecy by Henriette Merin and her allies, crafting weapons far removed from the optimism most people lived by. Its forges produced tools not for colonization, not for exploration, but for a war no one else admitted was approaching. Antimatter devices, classified designs, hidden caches of armaments, all were built behind the curtain of progress. They showed that some leaders did not share the certainty of citizens above ground. The moon crystallized this duality more than any other world. Glittering domes and research stations gave the appearance of stability, but beneath that surface, the K1 project confronted something few could accept. The worms and signs of hive nesting revealed an enemy not rooted in machines or resource scarcity, but in hostile life. The teams who uncovered it never returned to share their findings fully. Their silence ensured most of humanity kept walking under bright domes. Unaware predators nested below their feet. That disconnect, public triumph shrouding hidden threat, is central to understanding why the era already strained. The war minds carried the same contradiction. They were built to ensure humanity's safety on a planetary scale, and their defences worked flawlessly as far as ordinary lives were concerned. But reliance on them was an all-or-nothing gamble. protection felt absolute until the instant it ceased. Rasputin and systems like it coordinated every layer of defence with breathtaking precision, yet that concentration of power left no backup. People lived as though storms could never reach them, while engineers knew the shield could not be guaranteed forever. At the same time, anomalies appeared at the far edge of detection. Reports filtered from observatories, noting signals that did not belong to comets, stars, or radiation. Strange patterns and shifts suggested presence, not absence, in the deep vacuum. Official announcements never reached broader society, but evidence was quietly absorbed by organisations. Budgets increased for advanced weapon designs. Work on sci-fi and antimatter payloads expanded even as warnings about their risks grew louder. Outwardly, perfection gleamed. Inwardly, the tone was defensive and guarded. Io's terraforming marked one of the last sweeping gestures of expansion. It demonstrated that even the most violent environments could bow to the traveller's aid, turning lava plains into places that hinted at life. But within that display of wonder lay dependence. Colonies, crops, water cycles, all leaned heavily on the gifts of the traveller. If it faltered or departed, the balance of entire worlds would collapse. That dependency wasn't denied so much as ignored, hidden under the assumption the traveller's presence was permanent. This tension extended out into the asteroid belt. Mining habitats multiplied, symbols of human ingenuity at its most ambitious. Entire families lived within hollowed rocks, turned into towns. Yet such infrastructure could just as easily serve war as peace. Resources converted into weapons or fortifications rather than homes. In hindsight, the scale of spread magnified vulnerability. The wider the expansion, the harder the fall once walls broke. This is why the late Golden Age feels spectral in the record. On one side gleamed unmistakable brilliance, the flowering of technology, off-world prosperity, cosmic guardians overhead. On the other side grew secrets, a hidden forge, concealed anomalies, living predators beneath the moon, technologies edging beyond human control. For most citizens, there was no reason to imagine collapse. For those keeping records at the edge of power, there was more reason than they dared say. If you need one image for this ending moment, think of a lantern casting its glow across a whole courtyard. The light is real, warm, reassuring, but behind the lantern, its base rests on a cracked stone that no one bothers to check. That was the state of balance. Real illumination built upon something unstable. Soon, foreshadowing gathered from every angle. Observatories whispering about impossible shapes. Forgeries of secret weapons stacked in silos. War minds making choices so vast their reasoning was already beyond human oversight. Worm-nested tunnels hiding beneath familiar ground. Each sign pushed against the conclusion most ignored. Even the brightest civilizations are breakable. The end, of course, did not come from falling inward alone. The collapse arrived with the approach of the darkness itself. This was no gradual decline of resources or predictable faltering of systems. It was sudden arrival from the deep, an external force vast enough to overturn every plan. Records tell us the traveller confronted the darkness and fought to shield humanity. It held at the last possible moment, sacrificing itself to remain above Earth. The exact mechanics remain lost or folded into legend, but that act of resistance is remembered as salvation in the midst of ruin. From that clash came the aftermath, you know. Colonies shattered. War minds went silent or fractured. The careful lattice of networks no longer kept the system whole, but under the Traveller's hushed final watch, survivors gathered. They built the last city, a settlement at the feet of that silent sphere, holding on to memory of what had been light across worlds. In the span of only days or weeks, a system-wide utopia contracted to a fortress of endurance. So when we speak about the Golden Age in its twilight, it was not collapse from complacency alone. It was the arrival of an adversary so overwhelming that every achievement shrank before it. Humanity had risen higher than ever. Then the shadow swept through and erased nearly all. What remains are ruins, fragments, and the last city beneath the sky that glows with a traveller now mute. This chapter lingers as both tragedy and reminder. Achievement does not exempt from vulnerability. Strength always carries shadow. The Golden Age proves that even perfection can end when the universe presses back harder than one is able to stand. Survivors carried its memory, not as nostalgia, but as lesson. Take a moment to sit with that. The story of the Golden Age is not simply wonder followed by disaster. It is the record of both existing at once, progress and fragility written into every achievement. If this story resonates, consider subscribing for more slow lore narrations. Tell me what surprised you in the comments, because the larger truth is already visible. Humanity reached its highest peak during the Golden Age, yet even then, the shadow of collapse stretched underneath. The Golden Age reached tremendous heights, yet its foundations carried hidden fragility. Abundance never guarantees immunity. Great achievements stood side by side with quiet weakness, concealed beneath gardens, cities, and technologies that seemed enduring. The lesson is clear. Progress does not erase risk. It only shifts where the risk resides. Think of a lamp casting light across a room. The same glow that comforts also defines its own shadow. That contrast is what history leaves us. Share your thoughts below, Guardian. If you want more slow lore like this, subscribe and rest easy under that soft light.